Very warm welcome from my side to today's Impact for Breakfast session. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you're dialing in from. I know we have people from all over the world today with us. It is such a pleasure to be co-hosting today's virtual Impact for Breakfast session with the IIC, the Impact Investor Council, and Artha Impact. This is the beginning of a series of virtual sessions that we'll be hosting with IIC in this year and coming month. So there's much more to come. We are super excited to kick it off today with you and start this journey. We have known Neha and her team for quite a few years now, and it's been a wonderful journey to partner with them. And yes, and this is the peak of the partnership. So we're looking forward to do more of these in the future. So please stay tuned. And thank you to the all of IIC team for this wonderful partnership. By way of introduction, my name is Deborah Keller, and I lead on the Impact for Breakfast initiative, which is an initiative supported by Artha Impact, the impact investing arm of the Rianta Capital Family Office. This specialized group has been gathering and growing since 2008, starting in London with an expansion today to 36 cities and in five continents. We count today 4,400 members who are meeting virtually and at in-person gatherings in the local chapters to discuss challenges, models, methodologies, case studies, ideas, anything that help us better navigate and understand the space between financial and social return. Our objective with these gatherings is to help build relationships and share learnings that drive action and ultimately more capital into the impact sector. The Impact for Breakfast network is an informal network of family offices, foundations, funds, venture philanthropy, intermediary organizations, entrepreneurs, all with a common focus on social enterprise, entrepreneurship, and impact investing. Our sessions online and in person are a safe space to brainstorm and deconstructing the most challenging questions we face in the impact arena. For those who are here for the very first time, you're welcome to learn more about the network and visit our website, impactforbreakfast.com, which I'll share with you in the chat field shortly. So today we're kickstarting this series, and I'm super excited because we have a wonderful panel with us, which Audrey will introduce to you shortly. But before we dive in today's topic, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping notes before we get started. As you've heard, we will be recording this session today, and the link to the recording will be shared to you in a follow-up note with a recap that we are doing, that you are welcome to share with your network and colleagues, anyone that needs to hear about this series and the content we are producing today. After the panel discussion, which will last for 15 minutes, we'll move over to a Q&A session, which we have 30 minutes for. In total, we have 1.5 hours today for this virtual session. I kindly ask you to keep your microphones on mute during this session when you're not speaking, as we are quite a large group. That would be great, so we can minimize the background noise. And if you have questions which you'd like to share with the panel, you're welcome to use the chat field where you can post your question. And if you have a specific question to one of our speakers, please make sure to add the name of the speaker to your question. And the IIC team and Audrey will make sure to pick it up. And now, before I get started, I would like to pass the word to Royston Bragenta, the co-chair of the IIC of the Impact Investor Council, who is also the CEO of Garmin Impact Investment India. Royston actively contributes to several boards and advisory bodies, including the Sadhan Garmin Foundation India, the FICCI Financial Inclusion Committee, the CII National Committee on the NBFCs, and the United Nations Microfinance Resource Group, and last but not least, the most recent one with the GSG Impact where Royston is the first Indian elected to be on their global board. So congratulations, Royston. So the stage is yours, please.
Thank you so much. That almost sounded like an alphabet soup. I don't know how many letters are missing and whether we need to create some more bodies to be able to fill up the gap. But I want to start by sort of quoting Charles Dickens in his Tale of Two Cities. And he said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And in some ways, the last 24 hours, 24 months seems to be, giving us a sense that we are probably at the best of times and probably at the worst of times and both at the same time. So it's quite an exciting time for all of us, especially in the world that we operate in the impact sector that we are in. We seem to be connecting the three Ds to get this proper 3D perspective. Delhi, Davos, and DC in the last 24 hours, all three of these has been center of plate, and we've been seeing quite an exciting, set of developments on each of these three fronts. I think the initial 24 hours at Davos has been really focused on technology, focused on AI, focused on India as being front and center. Just those are the verbatim quotes from some of the speakers at Davos. In DC, we're also seeing interesting developments, and irrespective of which side of the spectrum you sit, you clearly will agree that this is the best of times and this is the worst of times. So, in the context of Indian impact investing, we've really seen a tremendous growth over the past decade. IIC last month celebrated our 10th anniversary, so we're 10 years young. It's an exciting time before we enter the terrible teens. We still have a couple of honeymoon years left, and we are delighted to have such a tremendous global support. We currently are at about 70 members in IIC, representing a bunch of GPs, LPs, funds, ecosystem players, and Girish and the team, Neha who runs partnerships, all of them have been doing a stellar job in shepherding, the various what we call the 4 Ps of the work of IIC: partnerships, programs, policy, and publications. And it's been a fascinating journey when all of these 4 Ps come together with the fifth P, which they don't know about, which I'm going to spring on them, which is passion. And when these 5 Ps come together, we see what we have reported in our last bulletin is that we are now at a cumulative $40 billion of impact investing. Bulk of it has come just in the last few years. There has been a tremendous surge in terms of the diversity, the breadth of investors. There's been a tremendous broadening in terms of the depth, breadth, number of players, disparity in terms of the family offices, pension funds, new pools of capital. And so all of these auguring well for a really fabulous 2025 and forward. Uh, it is really wonderful to have this breakfast session, tea session, dinner session, depending on which side of the international dateline you sit. But many people haven't slept all night after the news of the last 24 hours. So it could well be breakfast anywhere in the world. Uh, it's always a pleasure to see Audrey. She's been a friend and supporter of the impact investing space globally in India for many years, though she still looks the same as she did 12 years ago, which is uh, a crime in my book. But nevertheless, it's always a pleasure to meet with people who are passionate about this space. Uh, I would encourage all those on this call to make the most of the chat box, to post as many questions you want. I would love to say, that it's a screen. Someone's asked me whether this backdrop is actually a flag. It's not one of those templated backgrounds. So thank you for that question. This is when I spoke at the General Assembly, and I was fortunate to be able to get this, which reminds me of the work that we do and the reason why we do what we do. Uh, there are beautiful publications that come out from the IIC desk. So it would be great for you to get hold of, both the blended finance reports, the state of the sector reports, the reports that are coming out every month, and which gives you a detailed feel of the sector in India. And your contributions, your thoughts, your questions are always welcome to the ISE team. With that, I'm going to hand you, back to Audrey to take charge of the session. Thank you.
Before we hand over to Audrey, I just want to briefly introduce Audrey. So those who don't know her have a bit more background. So Audrey will be moderating our session today. So thank you for that, Audrey. Audrey is also the co-founder and director of Artha Impact, and the co-founder of Artha Networks, Inc. Audrey currently serves as a trustee for several nonprofit organizations, and she sits on the board of number of for-profits as well. She is on the board of the Impact Hub Global, Impact Hub Geneva, Impact Hub Yerevan, Ashton, Volans, Impact Finance Geneva, Argidius, and the Humanity Foundation. So it is a real pleasure to have Audrey, you as a rock star here today, and you'll be helping with the panel and with the speakers and guide through this panel discussion. So thank you for that, Audrey. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate it. It's a joy to be able to be here with all of you. So many names and faces of, those we've all interacted. We're all part of this ecosystem, and I see dozens of familiar names of friends. And so I just want to speak to that for 1 second, that, we are part of an active community that's characterized by a shared passion. We obviously all care deeply about what happens regarding the flow of capital into this ecosystem. These incredible innovators that we see in India, driven by mission and driven as well by, the profit motive. They seek to achieve the sustainability in so many forms through so many different vehicles. So it's just a delight to be here with you all. My role is just to keep this, the conversation going. We're a small family office that's been an active practitioner in the Indian ecosystem now for 18 years. And we have some experience. Some of our investee companies are here in the crowd, and it's a delight to see them here. Our goal is to try to elevate, the best cases, the wonderful vehicles that are already in place. And so I have the pleasure of moderating the discussion that features Rajat Bansal, Managing Director at Loke Capital, Dr. Andreas Nilsson, the Managing Director and Head of Impact Investments at Golding Capital Partners, Circe Santia from BTG Advaya, a partner there, and Dr. Dipesh Shah, who is the Executive Director of IFSCA and Gift City. And so what I'm going to do is, when I hand over with the questions, if each of you would like to add just a framing sentence about your role and how you feel about it, and then getting into the actual responses. We do have 50 minutes for the questions, and we'll do them in 2 rounds. So, and we'll do our best as well to keep our eyes on the chat. I believe we will be able to all receive a recording of the session afterwards. We've already culled some questions from all of you already. We'll try to ensure that we're capturing the ones you're asking live. So without further ado, I'm going to start in the first round of questions with Rajat Bansal. Rajat, in addition to, your own brief introduction, which I'll ask you to do, Loke Capital, which and Artha knows Loke because we were an early investor, Loke Capital has been one of the pioneers in impact investing and has witnessed the evolution of the last decade from a lot of investments in microfinance and now across into different sectors. May I ask you, Rajat, you yourself, when you look at financial inclusion at Loke Capital, can you walk us through the evolution that you've seen?
Sure. Thank you, Audrey. Great to be a part of this panel. And we, as Loke Capital, this is our 21st year of operations. So we have been in existence, I think, before the phrase impact investing officially existed. We used to call it double bottom line investing at that point in time. And since then, we have raised about $350 million across 4 funds. We are in fact about to launch our fifth fund and use that capital to invest in 45 in investments. Ended up serving more than 30 million customers, which is something that we really wear as a hat with a lot of pride. But on the other hand, if I look at our other key stakeholders, LPs, and Audrey, you and Andreas, coincidentally, both happen to be past and existing LPs in our fund. We've also managed to exit and distribute the first two funds and are well on track for doing that with the third fund as well. So if I look at both the customer side of it and the LPs, the areas that we think of as our key stakeholders, I would like to think we've probably served both quite well and continue to do that with subsequent funds and investments. In terms of the question you asked, Audrey, it's a very interesting one, and we often end up looking at where we've come from and how the space has evolved as a whole as well. But two or three very key areas where I think the evolution has been quite stark. First of all, I think if I think back to when we had started, and I would think till about 2010, 11, when you said impact investing with a profit motive, you could really count the business models that you can back on the tip of your fingers. It was probably only microfinance to begin with. That could be a profitable business, but could still deliver a social outcome. Over time, more sectors and business models have gotten added to it. So today, if you look at the range of business models that are being targeted by impact investors in India, it's almost difficult to club all of them into a single bucket of impact investing. So I think that is a very welcome change and a very exciting one as well. That has kept us passionate about what we do on an ongoing basis. And that's something we endeavor to advance with as an industry with the new capital that we raise and new customers that we serve. A second very key evolution as we see it, and which personally I've seen it on the ground very clearly, and that gives me a lot of joy, is originally when we probably as impact investors went to the ground, the customers, especially the underserved customers, really used to be in some sense decision takers and were really, almost the providers also used to see it as more of almost like a welfare activity. So you're doing something for the good of the customer, and the customer was often taken as a stakeholder that doesn't know much better than what their situation is. But today, when I go to the field, when I go to the ground, we see the customers as a much more of an equal stakeholder. So the customers have become a lot more demanding. They not just demand a basic service, but they demand quality of service. And the onus comes back to the companies and investors that back the social enterprises to make sure that you're delivering the services at the right quality at the right point in time, because there's competition and because the customers are a lot more aware. So I would say the end customer that an impact investment industry serves has also evolved and become a lot more savvier. And along with that, I think the industry has matured both in terms of not just the breadth of sectors, but also the kind of ticket sizes that we typically target. So initially, impact was only thought of from a venture perspective, but now you have large funds, growth funds that target impact as a market. So it's an entire spectrum that is covered by impact investors, which is, again, to me, it points to the evolution of the industry. So those are just some of the points. I think I've briefly touched upon two or three things at a very high level, but there's a whole 20-year journey that has gone into all three of those aspects. So we can dive deeper into any of those as we go through the discussion.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Rajat, for that. If you were to use your voice as the voice of the Indian GP from a general partner perspective, how do you see the on-ground funding gap in India's impact investing space? What does it look like today? How competitive is it? How big is it? And is there enough engagement from a GP perspective?
Right. It is competitive, and it is competitive because it is big. So I think both go hand in hand, and all of the GPs that we see today on the ground, we push each other to do well and do better. So I think that competition is it's a welcome change in the last few years, and it effectively raises the standards for the entire industry, which I think it's a huge positive. One of the gaps that I've typically seen over a few cycles of investing, and a large part of it actually gets driven by the LP focus as well. And that's something that we try to correct to some extent as GPs when we meet with LPs, is that sometimes the flow of capital, especially the global flow of capital into India, obviously follows certain themes. So it might be gender at one point in time. SDGs are a big focus area. More recently, climate and sustainability have become big areas. And we see a lot of the push and the capital gets concentrated into a particular theme for a set of years, or say half a decade. What that doesn't sometimes take into account is the fact that the core problems that we deal with are still relevant. So, for instance, if I take the last few years, climate has become a big theme, and rightfully all the LPs want to focus on climate. But does that mean that inclusion as a goal is less relevant today? You can debate it, but probably not. So you still need funds and GPs that focus on inclusion, and a large number of GPs still do that. But they become less important in the eyes of LPs because climate is not the key theme. So I think just that balance from a GP and LP perspective, that can be driven both from both of these stakeholders, that ends up serving the end customer better. I think that will just overall make sure that there's consistency of funding across various segments. But on the ground, whenever we visit, I think increasingly a lot of commercial capital also comes with certain impact or sustainability objectives. And I see that as a very welcome change, because it keeps the market fresh, it keeps the market competitive, and it pushes us all to do better.
Thank you so much for that. Your perspectives are very useful and salient, and it does seem to matter a great deal. What are the key words we're using? What is the narrative we're using to position our respective interventions? And then it's just left to the kind of serendipity of who is closest to us in these wide circles. And I think there's opportunities for engagement that I think, only groups like the IIIC can bridge. So thank you for that. I'm going to switch gears over to address Andreas. Andreas, please do also share, kind of an overarching introduction of your role and how you see it, how you feel about it. And I'd like to ask you, you've been part of the impact investing journey for a long time with Golding Capital, and you've had previous roles at UBS and Sonan. So you have, you've had different vantage points to bring to this discussion. When you look at investing in India, what has been your journey over the years, and what has worked for you and what has not? Where do you see opportunity?
Thank you, Audrey. Yes, so my role is today head of impact investing at Golding Capital Partners, which is a German asset management boutique with 15 billion euros. So we invest only in private markets, and a lot of our investments go into private equity funds. And my journey has been one of being quite an early part. I don't want to say I was a pioneer, because there were people before me at Loke and other places that were doing it, but I stumbled into this from for European, I guess, quite early. I've learned a lot from the GPs that we have interacted with on the ground in India, for example, Loke. So I'm very grateful for that, and an advice to investors who are keen to learn more is, don't, as Rajat was saying, don't just bring your own mandate saying we need to do climate, finance, financial services, or healthcare. Listen to the people on the ground, what works. That has been an important part of my journey, to really learn what works in a place like India. I've seen that when we invested or interacted with GPs in India 10 years ago, most of the other LPs were family offices and local investors from India. Today, that has changed a lot. And today, I'm very pleased that my role is to bring in European institutional investors into this. These are investors that are not so familiar with India, not so familiar with impact investing. So it requires a lot of patience, my job, but I seem to seek those challenges out because I'm one of those who sort of feel very passionately about this. But it is possible. I think there needs to be a lot of discipline on all sides to make it work. It's not something that investors in Europe need to have in their portfolios, but it is definitely something that adds value if they understand it. So in terms of strategy, we have seen what works have been very sector focused funds that are really domain experts in a certain sector. For example, financial services, where the team is an authority and a well-known player in that space in India. That is crucial. So that helps the focus of the fund to be slightly easier to communicate, but it also increases the chances of success. So many of these lessons learned are also applicable to any form of private equity investing. It's actually not that different, just that the bar is actually even higher on Indian funds, I would say. The team setup needs to be very clear. It needs to be a strong culture. We've declined many funds because of internal tensions, for example. Another thing, and I'm just going through some thoughts here, what really is important, and a question mark for many investors, is exit planning. So what is important, and I think, again, Loke has been a good example of this, is really a proactive exit agenda from the date of the signing of an acquisition, to really bring in that urgency, because markets are perhaps not as liquid, not as deep as they are in other places. So that needs to be very much driven by the GP. What we have seen, and also in terms of the funds that we see are successful, are ones that are clear in their communication and have thought it through, and has a message that is simple and is very commercial, right? So I want to emphasize that what ultimately needs to be very clear is that the commercial case, which I think is definitely there for India and many different sectors. But I think that's very important to sort of not think that impact investing, we're doing the world a favor. That may be true. For all of us believe that, but I think it needs to be a very clear-cut case that works without without being an impact investor. It should appeal to any type of investor. Final thought has been the sort of the impact management, the impact measurement part of things. Here we have been we have become very demanding as a European institutional investor. And we are now requiring our funds to comply with Article 9 of the EU SFDR, which some of you know, some of you don't. I know Rajat knows it because he was very much exposed to that. But I think the learned lesson from our side has been that the funds that we are typically talking about, and this is the growing fund landscape, that's ultimately not the issue. I think if you are doing a great job as an investor in India, focusing a certain sector, you will be able to fulfill the requirements of a typical impact investor. If you don't have it quite yet, the investor base should help you get there. So those are some thoughts I had on the journey. I do think it's still early days for mainstream investors from Europe to really get engaged, but I see that I think there is a role to be played here. Clearly, because I'm doing it, but for fund of funds to actually be a bridgehead that can sort of get the initial exposure for some mainstream investors to get acquainted with the country.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you very much. Certainly, external investors to the country have multiple pathways that they can pursue. Some are, some choose to go direct and engage in direct deals. It takes quite a bit of courage to dip the toe in there. And others will go into fund or fund structures. That's part of the mechanic. That's part of sort of the landscape of options that these types of family offices, institutions can see. And there are different challenges associated with each one. I hope we can delve a little bit deeper into some of these in the next round of discussions. I am going to switch over to Xerxes. Antia, a partner at BTG at Via. Xerxes, I'd invite you again to say a few words about your position, how you feel about what you do, etc. In addition to asking you this question, if you could walk us through the key regulatory and compliance aspects that investors must consider when they're building an investment thesis for impact enterprises in the country. We'd like for you to elaborate on any common challenges that these investors face and how they're being addressed over time, because the regulatory environment has evolved. For those of us in practice, we see it. It's a little bit hard to keep up with the nuance, but we'd welcome your inputs here.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And your role is the way we see our role in all of this is the reason why the law firm was founded. We believe in actually trying to simplify the complex mesh of regulations that are here in India. And at the end of the day, we find that unless you have clear understanding of what you want to do, it becomes very difficult to navigate the Indian regulatory landscape. And that leads me into what I really wanted to talk about today over here, which is basically focus at a high level about the main sets of concerns or regulations that would impact investors that are coming either from inside India or outside India, as well as talk about a broad differentiation about what would be the regulatory framework if you are looking at actually getting some kind of financial return or whether you are looking at more outcome-based return over here. Now, let's start off talking about residential status. As we all know, India does not really have full capital account convertibility of the rupee, which is a very fancy way of saying that any money coming in and out of India is heavily regulated and has to comply with certain rules over here. So how does that impact me if I was, for example, a non-resident investor? What it means is that if I'm coming in, I have to first be very clear as to whether I'm coming in with the intent of making some kind of financial return, or whether what I'm looking at is more outcome-based funding. Now, taking each one in turn, if I'm looking at getting some kind of financial return, the challenge is in India, usually foreign investment, and this would be usually typically by way of investment, that is subject to certain pricing norms, which basically specify that if a non-resident is investing into India, then usually they have to do it at or above the fair value of the security. And at the end of the day, if I'm exiting, there's also a limit to what I can take out by way of my return because I'm capped at also the fair value. Now, over time, the government has gone and liberalized this a little bit. There are certain types of vehicles that can be set up to take care of pricing norms, but that's not typical for the kind of impact investing industry over here. There are funds that have been set up that have received particular statuses which allow them to bypass these pricing norms. But otherwise, if you're just a regular investor, this is one thing that you need to consider is when I invest my money, what is the kind of return that I'm actually looking at? If I'm not looking at making a financial return and what I'm actually looking at is more outcome-based, then there are a series of other regulations that come into play. And the principal one of this is, of course, one which and I'm sure no one needs any introduction to is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Now, The challenges under this act is basically I, as a non-resident investor, cannot fund someone by way of a grant or a contribution unless that person has received permission to receive the grant or the contribution, or has registered in this regard with the government. And for the last, I won't even say 10 years, I would say 15 years, the government has been going slow on granting these kind of registrations and trying to tighten up the regulatory environment over here. Now, let's assume that I actually do want to go ahead and make a return. There are ways, as I said, that I could structure it. If I was a resident investor, or if I was a fund here in India, then of course I have the advantage of not being subject to pricing norms. If I want to go ahead and look at investing on an outcome-based method, that is also much easier if I am an Indian investor. However, typically, and this is one thing that we've noticed here in India, is most of the impact investing at times that is done by corporates. They try and slot it within their CSR obligations. Now, that, of course, places certain fetters on what the money can be used for, as well as the biggest one over there is the time frame for which you can actually run these kind of projects, because under CSR rules, you can have the maximum term for on what they call an ongoing project is 1 + 3 financial years. So it becomes difficult at times for an Indian corporate to also support these kind of projects on a long-term basis. Now, as I said, the way that we treat our practice is trying to come up with innovative solutions. And I'm sure that some of them will be talked about by Dr. Shah, because Gift City is quite the flavor right now for coming up with innovative things over here. For ordinary investors, however, there are ways to do it. As I said, the key criteria is going to be to determine whether I'm resident or non-resident, whether I expect to make a return or I don't make a return. And also, what we have found a greater scrutiny nowadays in terms of diligence that is being done on targets over here, specifically in relation to can they actually meet the parameters of what they say they can do. Information rights, we find, is also something that has changed over time, and there's a greater emphasis being placed on investors to be able to go ahead and monitor the projects and see how they're doing. This is, of course, in turn leads to greater transparency in the sector overall. Now, as I said, this is a very high overview that I tried to give of everything and some of the principal challenges that we see, Audrey, over here.
Thank you very much for sharing these perspectives, Sarsis. It's very informative and is really part of the entire experience of engagement for any of these investors, especially outside the country. I will shift over to ask Dr. Shah a question. Dr. Dipesh Shah is the Executive Director of IFSCA in the Gift City. Dr. Shah, in a recent convening, you mentioned that GIFT IFSC is quickly establishing itself as a new age global financial center and is playing a key role in bringing global capital flows into India. For our international audience, considering investments in India, could you provide a brief overview of GIFT City's key characteristics and developments, including the mention of the social stock exchange, and how these initiatives, how you see these initiatives as facilitating global investor engagement?
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Neha and the team for having me on this. Initially, I thought that is it a right platform that I'm invited into? But thanks to Antia of raising the concerns of how the global investors are looking to invest and what are the possible routes to invest into India and how a gift city can probably play a role there. But to the audience today on this call, I think India has now created a separate global financial hub within its onshore ecosystem as an offshore location. What does it mean? It means that you've created a separate enclave within the Indian regulatory ecosystem, which is outside of the domestic law, domestic foreign exchange law. and thereby making it simpler and easier for the global institutions to invest into India, and likewise the Indian institutions and investors to invest into the markets outside. So we call this more like a gateway of inbound and outbound investments coming into India and investments going out of India. What then the gift entails or covers for the people on this call. GIFT is a location, physical location on the western part of India, in very close to the Gandhinagar, which is the capital of the state of Gujarat. This center has been notified as an international financial services center outside of the local foreign exchange laws of India, which means the local Foreign Exchange Management Act does not apply to the International Financial Services Center, and thereby making the currency fully convertible. To what was just said, that it's in India, the currency is not fully convertible, and thereby the money coming in at times has its own way of investing and own way of taking out with the regulatory compliances. Government has made a new beginning by creating this new financial center into the ecosystem. What now this entails is that the fund industry, particularly the category 1, 2, and 3 funds, which invest into the venture opportunities or the hedge funds and even the impact funds, they are registering into the GIFT ecosystem. And from here, they are investing into Indian listed and unlisted firms. In fact, as we speak, last month we had a huge event in GIFT City where the Japanese investors, particularly Suzuki, unveiled their next Bharat Venture Impact Investment Fund into GIFT, which is registered in GIFT, investing into social impacts projects in India. And there were several investee companies of there also present when this was hosted in the GIFT City. What this now entails is that for the foreign institutions, the money coming into the funds remains in dollar. It gets invested in terms of their investments in India, and they are able to freely repatriate money back to home in the fund structures that the IFFC has, without worrying about the FCRA and the other norms that which applies when you are coming to the onshore India. With this, we are close to now 200 funds registered in last 2 years, with almost $45 billion of capital committed in these funds to invest into India and outside. In fact, we have seen close to $8 billion of funds already invested from GIFT into India. And as I said, the Suzuki's Impact Fund is fully operational here. And I'm sure as the some of the participants on this call in future, they decide, including the Artha Impact and the others, of creating a structures to invest into the impact capital, probably the GIFT City regulations, which are now a separate regulation with a separate unified regulator, would help you to come and operate from a platform where it is easier for the global money to invest into social opportunities in India. And this has also been made very tax efficient. In fact, the investors coming in are not even required to obtain the tax registrations in India. They're not required to file a tax return in India. And the category 1, 2, and all have a pass-through status, which means the investors get some money back in hand without any hassle in India. And this is probably changing the way that India is now allowing the global investors to access India opportunities, and also to the social entrepreneurs and the impact entrepreneurs. Probably for them, it could be easier to connect with the funds located in GIFT already, which are now taking the investments into Indian opportunities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. That's incredibly helpful context for depicting how this is effectively greasing the wheels for more capital to flow into the country. As an early investor, that starting out in 2006 or 7, the learning curve, the ability to we set up structures. We had to set up structures in Mauritius. We had all kinds of hoops to jump through, many of which today are just moot. I mean, they're just not they're no longer relevant because of the evolution of the environment, the policy environment. So clearly the gift city is a very interesting gateway for those who are, considering entry and engagement. And I think the more we can do to articulate and elevate the advantages of the gift city and what it offers, I think the better off we'll be as an ecosystem. I'm going to do another shift back to Rajat, another quick round of rapid fire questions. Ideally, we are having probably 3 to 4 minute responses. And then I'd like to open back up to some of the very interesting questions that are being thrown into the chat. Rajat, Low Capital is now at Fund 4 and focusing on climate, agri, and healthcare, in addition to financial inclusion. I'm particularly interested in the healthcare piece because I'm very deeply involved with a group called Artha Impact, focused entirely on health. I'd like to, understand what is Loke's strategy for these next 5 years, because you've witnessed the trends, you've adapted your strategy accordingly. Which sectors do you see as holding the most significant potential? And where do you feel the gaps remain in really reaching the underserved? Because not all the deal flow that we see necessarily bridges that gap.
Right. That's an interesting question, Audrey. And I think each firm and each GP tries to answer it based on their own DNA and what they stand for. For us, our natural instinct is to go deeper in the sectors that we work in, rather than go broader and try to do a lot of new things. And just in keeping in line with some of that approach, for us in the next few years, and this is probably also a good point for me to pitch our 5th fund, which we'll be launching soon with some of the LPs on the call. But just in terms of the sector focus and the models that we are developing more of a thesis on. So one, if I look at financial services, which has been the majority of our investments by value till date, in addition to going deeper in credit, I think as an industry, we've probably not done enough work on other core products that the end customer needs. So areas like insurance, areas like investments or wealth, as it's called, these are as important for the low income or mass market segments. And these models have not received enough of a focus from impact investors. So we're constantly looking at models, and as the market is deepening at a national level, trying to do more in these areas. And these are a key focus for us to say that how do we round out, if we look at a low income household, how do we round out their exposure to the economy, not just through credit, but through protection or risk management, or through helping them enhance their saving or wealth. So that's a key theme for us that we're diving into. In the climate space now, today, as you see, funds focus on climate as an overall thesis. But our internal belief is that over time, this needs to evolve. And all of us need to become a lot more targeted in what we mean by climate. So it's not just an overall focus on climate, but be specific in articulating which problem within which industry are we looking to solve, and then focus your resources on that. So from our vantage point, very naturally, climate financing becomes a key important area where we bring in our skills in financing, but use it for helping more of the transition to a greener economy. Agriculture, that's something that we've been focused on. Can we enhance the focus on sustainability within agriculture? And third, which we're also quite excited by, is we clearly see the consumer sector or consumerism as a whole in India really growing over a period of time. I think the onus will again fall back on impact investors to make sure that consumption is more responsible or has a higher degree of consciousness than perhaps it has today. So can we seed or come in at growth stage in businesses that are promoting consumption with a certain consciousness that overall helps the economy and society in becoming more sustainable? So those are just few of the examples. I know I didn't touch upon healthcare, which you mentioned, but those are just few examples of how when we pick out each of these sectors, we don't just pay lip service to these sectors at a macro level, but really go deep and find opportunities and problems to solve and help benefit those stakeholders at the end.
Thank you, Rajat. Just a quick one, which I will also ask to Andreas as I kind of do the tour. What, most of us engaging with direct opportunities know that we have only a couple of instruments we can use. We are using CCCPs, we're using CCDs. How much is there a role, and this is also one for Cersis, I think, how much is there a role for truly innovative financing structures? Like, do we have one or two examples of truly, like, because I can tell you very clearly from Artha Impact's perspective, we haven't done anything particularly creative or innovative. We're swimming in a particular structure and we just know what we know, and we're not able to get into a creative realm. Do you have any one or two examples, without necessarily even the detail, we can get into it later in Q&A, of something different, something that really amplifies that impact that we want to see?
Is that a question to
So
me?
I think
Sorry, to you, Rajat.
Quick follow on to Rajat, and then I'm going to ask the same to you, Andreas, along with one other question.
Sure. So I'll give a more boring answer and I'll pass it on to Andreas for more innovation on it. But I think to a large extent, it is driven by what the mandate for the fund is and what we sign up with our LPs. And when it comes to that investing spectrum within impact funds, we probably stand more on the commercial side of things. So for us, the core instrument continues to be a CCPS or a CCD. Equity essentially, and we don't do other instruments. But what we work really hard to do is complement some of that equity financing with more either technical assistance grants or other forms of financing that we can activate through our same set of LP base, make that accessible to the end company, and in a way give them that benefit without really disrupting the core equity investment thesis and the promise that we've made to LPs. But we've seen a lot more models, especially around blended finance, coming into the market. But without taking much time on that, maybe Andreas, if you would like to add.
Yeah, Andreas, if you could address broadly, your view of what is truly innovative and creative, if anything, and also share a view on, European investors like FMO, IKEA Foundation, many others have established a presence. They're active, they're engaged. How do we encourage more of these to participate? And as part of that innovative, creative, process of looking at, instruments, part of it.
I'll be a bit controversial, perhaps. I think from a European institutional investor perspective, who have not invested into India, and even for them, impact investing is something new. And the challenge then is to add more creative structures in terms of instruments, makes the complexity go beyond what it does not help the case. Even if it's a smarter instrument, it adds complexity, and that is one of the challenges that impact investing has in India today. It needs to be super focused and easy to communicate, because the airtime one has compared to European opportunities is fraction. So the minute you add complexity, it sort of reduces the chances, even if it may make sense on the ground. This is for commercial investors, like Rajat was saying. And the same goes for blended finance. We've seen it in all over the world. There have been social impact bonds. They add complexity, they add transaction costs, and it takes up a lot of brain power to just get your head around it. And then that reduces the likelihood of success. And that is my experience. And so I think the Indian opportunity is so large that a lot is doable without that. I'm not saying it's not I think there is a role to be played, but I think there are other pockets of capital that are better suited at this. I know some of the DFIs are playing more, or working more with blended finance solutions, but it takes them a year of having someone based in Brussels to get that in place and then start rolling it out. So it's not something that is and it doesn't really move the needle that much for an institutional investor that's new to this, sitting in Europe. So that's the sad truth. The challenge lies in simplifying it rather than adding complexity.
Thank you for that, Andreas. Agree with that. Seems the work is hard enough as it is, so we don't want to add barriers. But I do think there is space for us to get into some of, how the regulatory landscape shapes the future of impact investing. And so this culminates in questions to Cersis. Cersis, are there emerging financial instruments or structures that you see that could encourage broader participation, a wider participation, more active one?
Yeah. So there has been some change. I won't say there has been significant change over the years, but there has been some change in the kind of instruments or the kind of structure that you can go ahead and use. But I just want to start off by again echoing what Rajat and Andreas were saying, was that the more complexity that you add to any of these things, the more expensive it becomes to overall create the structure and to implement the structure. And also, you have to think, does the kind of work that we're doing actually require something that complex? Now, I'll give you just a classic example of this. We have the social stock exchange where not-for-profits can go and list their projects over there. Now, to my mind, that was actually a very interesting change to come out in the marketplace because it allowed investors a way of actually subscribing to and supporting projects that were very transparent. Now, I believe that actually the government should possibly take this a little bit further and to open the social stock exchanges to for-profit entities that could actually list there and carry out and list particular projects over there. That would actually be, to my mind, really innovative and interesting over here, as well as keeping the interests of both the investor as well as the implementing agency or the implementing company in question tandem. In addition, what we also think is, for example, if you have a social impact bond or you use an instrument, something along those lines, again, looking at doing it something what Rajat says, which to my mind is absolutely common sense, figure out what are the elements that have to generate a financial return and see what is the simplest way of actually going ahead and achieving that. And then for the outcome-based investors, sit down with them and figure out what is the best way to bring in their funds and what are the kind of outcomes that they do, and have maybe both the structures run in parallel rather than trying to fit everything into one giant structure over here. And we think that there are just a few nudges that the government could do to existing legislation that would possibly unlock a great deal of capital and, shall we say, even animal spirits in this. The first is, if, for example, FCRA was slightly amended to provide that projects listed on a stock exchange can be subscribed to by non-resident investors over there, whether for profit or not for profit, but just to have that simple clarity that they could directly invest in a project on a social stock exchange. Or even allowing under this current CSR regulations for companies to actually go ahead and invest in projects of a longer term duration, or even to invest in projects, again, going back to the social stock exchange, which currently it's not very clear whether they receive CSR credit for. So in short, we think that you don't need too much complexity. What you do need is perhaps a nudge from the government to further liberalize some of the existing regulations to make it a little bit more investor friendly and to make it also a little bit more friendly for target companies to function.
Thank you, Cersis. That's extremely helpful. And I'll just add on a personal note that one of the major barriers, I think, to action and activity and engagement is just visibility. we're a couple, we're 100 people on the call. There's 300 people that will receive the recording. Every one of us will have had access to some sort of deal flow, portfolio. There's information to be shared. Where does that sit? So that's part of what we are committed to supporting as well at Artha Impact. And this is, I think, part of the answer, part of the key to just expanding the activity and utilizing what is there. So with that,
Absolutely.
I turn over to Dr. Shah. Dr. Shah, with its regulatory, with the clarity that the Gift City brings, the tax exemptions, the growing range of opportunities, and hopefully their discoverability, Gift City is obviously an appealing destination for both domestic and international investors. Impact investing is still a niche compared to VC and PE. How can the platforms like the Social Stock Exchange and Gift City be leveraged to pool diverse forms of capital, to shorten the distance between points and enable this blended financing and all the will to do it to actually reach the impact-driven projects?
So, I think a very good discussion, Audrey, and very good question. I think in today's time, what the investors or the group needs is the right information. And they want to feel free to ask questions. And as a new regulator into the Indian ecosystem, as a single unified regulator of all the financial services for the International Financial Services Center, we also came across the issue of whether the regulators would be approachable. Many times they come and ask us, it's so easy to come and speak to you. We thought that it's difficult to come to a regulator and talk to them. So even coming to a regulator and asking a clarity was also considered to be a very, very challenging task from the funds and the investors. And probably what we are trying to facilitate is to try and bring that information to the hand. And probably by keeping the IFFCA, the regulator's website, which is fully up to the speed in terms of what type of funds have been registered, what type of categories that they are investing to, making sure we provide the information of the fund managers sitting into the ecosystem. Thereby, in a way, making it easier for them to understand what is happening from the zone. And then probably on a regular basis, probably come on the several platforms, including the one that we are on today, just to make people aware of that there is something of a structure or a platform available through the Indian regulatory system, which is within the powers of the government of India, created separate ecosystem for foreign investors, and keep disseminating this information to the right audience, making their life easier when they are trying to create new structures for investments into India. So I completely echo the sentiment of the fear or the unknown, the fear of unknown, which is there in the minds of the investors. And as a regulator, probably this is something we are trying to address from our side to the potential funds and the ecosystem players here. But I can add to what was just said. In terms of the impact investments and the social, our website, as I said, is up to the speed. We also have ESG funds, which are listed on our stock exchanges. So almost $13 billion of ESG funds have been listed on the stock exchanges. And there are several incentives provided by the government of India to the Indian institutions who wants to raise these bonds and list it on this exchange for the global investors. So maybe through Artha Impact and others, we'll be very happy to send more details, and probably I'll put the website address in my in the chat box. If anybody wants to explore further, they can look at it, and would be very happy to address if there are questions separately on the email also to understand the jurisdictions better for investing into India.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shah. And of course, I'll direct everyone to come to the amazing team at the IIIC to kind of orchestrate the wealth of, questions and informational elements that I think folks will want to delve deeper into because we won't have the time today. I'm going to try to make the most of the time remaining into a Q&A session. And I'd like to start with Royston, just for a moment. The debt piece of, that whole category of financing is such an incredibly important part of the working models of so many of the companies that equity investors are supporting. Can you shed some light on some of the non-conventional approaches that you've seen to rural lending? And, how have industry bodies and ecosystem organizations that you've been long involved with, how have they been able to support debt investments towards these impact enterprises?
So Audrey, my mind goes back to the microfinance sector. And if there was one thing that really catalyzed scale in microfinance, it was access to debt. We saw the floodgates open with the RBI guidelines on priority sector lending, with microfinance being included in that. And people like Low Capital and others saw their investees being able to access tremendous pools of debt capital. We've not seen that same sort of floodgates effect on the broader impact investing side. One, of course, is the fact that the priority sector lending norms are not very clear about some of the other broader spaces. I've been of the view that we need to replace the whole priority sector list with just the SDG list, so that it's then very clear, the CSR list to be replaced with the SDG list, the social venture capital fund under SEBI to be replaced with the CSR list. Then suddenly we're all talking the same language. We're all supporting the same pieces. If this is a $37 trillion gap, which is what the global SDG funding gap is, my estimate is about 6-7 trillion is the India gap of that, which is bigger than our GDP currently. So that gives us a scale in terms of where this has to grow. And if debt does not come in, the equity is never going to be able to bring that type of fillip to the sector. So the need to bring in new pools of capital, local debt, bank debt, private debt, pension fund debt, all of these are pools of capital. We've seen over the last couple of years some sort of step up with the local banks coming in, but there has to be tremendous acceleration. At the Brazil G20, Ajay Banga committed that this $8 billion of guarantees is going to go up to 30 billion. So a lot more catalytic funding. We at Grameen Impact have seen the need to create micro bonds. So you talked about earlier, and you asked about totally really innovative structures. And we've said, while everyone's looking at $100 million bond or a $500 million bond, is it possible to do 500 bonds of 1 million each? So really break it up into putting social enterprises who need $200,000 of debt. Put 5 of them together, do $1 million bond, do 10, 100, 500 such bonds, and create a micro bond factory. And then we go to Dipesh Bhai at the Gift City, go to the stock exchange, list these bonds, get them credit rated. So the ability for us to think about debt creatively, this is the year. We have to seize that opportunity. We at Grameen Impact are committed. In my role in IIC, we are committed, and we need to build a lot more traction on debt. And we would open this up to funds that are there globally to look more creatively at investing into debt vehicles in India, because that's where the catalytic funding is going to get unlocked.
Thank you, Royston. Thank you. I'm diving right into some of these questions that I've been trying to pick up from the exchanges on the chat. And what characterizes what we're doing? What makes it different from traditional VC, PE investing? Ultimately, there's some sort of patience that's enshrined in the approach. It's not one way of differentiating the methodologies, but there's a different consciousness and approach to the investment process. There are challenges in how we bridge. This is a question to all of you. This is the challenges of how we bridge the gap between what we see as the impact measurement and its priority, and then the actual impact delivered on the ground. There's always that, separation, and it's kind of what people roll their eyes at when they look at some of the, really crazy impact figures that are reported at the end of the year from different funds, because if all of that was true, we would have solved the problems by now. Who would like to speak up and mention their perspective on this gap as they see it, perhaps one answer there, and then I could move to one of the 25 other questions we have already on tap. Anyone in particular have a reflection?
If I may, and I'm just now looking at it from a very narrow lens as a legal practitioner, I think the key over here is going to be managing expectations. And that's a bit of a loaded phrase, but it goes back to what I was saying, and I think one or two of the panelists also mentioned throughout. It's be clear what you want and what the impact is supposed to be. Make sure that you're getting enough information flow so that you can understand, are these realistic goals that are going to be set over here? Because as you said, I mean, there are different ways of measuring impact. At times it becomes a very soft kind of measurement over there. It's very subjective rather than objective. So as an investor, you need to then be clear that if the target turns around and says, look, this is the impact that we have created, are you going to be able to take what they say at face value, or do you need to go back and validate that on your own? And if so, how are you going to actually validate that?
Indeed. Thank you, Sarsis.
Quickly,
I
just from my side of reflection on if looking at impact measures, even in US, Europe. So if I invest into 10 different European climate funds, I will get 10 different reportings of CO2 emissions avoided. So I would ask everybody, don't make this your full-time job, because you will not succeed, because it's too tricky, difficult, as we heard. And I think there is a balance to be found, and it's a sensitive one. It's important to distinguish what you do, but there is also potential to do too much that is not really appreciated in the end.
Yeah, there is a lot of fragmentation. To that point, Andreas, based on what you've observed, are institutional investors expecting that private enterprises adhere to, B Corp certification or one or another criteria to be identified as an impact enterprise officially?
I'd say no, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a signal. These are all signals, and it's important how you signal your, in the end, dedication to a certain type of investments that you want to do, and your expertise in that, in sort of creating value for these companies in that way. But that could also be done in different ways. And what I said initially is sector expertise is for me very similar, that if you are an expert in delivering or supporting companies working in tier 2, tier 3 cities with healthcare opportunities, or insurance companies getting their operations up and running in these rare regions, people can then see that from this sector focus follows quite clearly certain impact outcomes. And there is sort of a pathway you can develop to see that there is a clear impact following these investments. But there's a different thing of quantifying that exactly. But I think for us, seeing that pathway is actually sufficient.
Right. Thank you, Andreas. If we could give, sort of pointers or best practice advice to GPs and LPs, on both sides of that equation, who are passionate about the impact, what would be the advice given? What would be the best way for them to navigate a very competitive, fragmented ecosystem in the midst of a huge growth story that's unique on this planet? What would we tell them? Any reflections? Rajat?
My 2 cents, yeah, I think irrespective of whether you're sitting in Bombay, Bangalore, or Belgium, my suggestion would be to be close to the ground, which might end up being Belgaum, neither of Bombay or Bangalore. You effectively, whether you're allocating capital at a global level or managing those investments in India, there's no substitute to really knowing the end customer, really seeing the use case that your capital or the service is solving at the customer, at the household level, and then at least being a little more informed about what it is that you're trying to solve. I think that will remove a lot of the theoretical assumptions we typically make about whether it's impact or whether sometimes what we think that a customer ought to do or ought to behave as. That will also remove a lot of the communication or the gaps that exist between GPs and LPs when, as GPs, we try to explain the ground situation to LPs. Now, of course, it's not always practical to have people fly into India all the time, but if there's a way to solve or bridge that gap, probably that will be the single most important one in my mind.
Thank you, Rajat. Royston, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to say that, this is going to be a difficult year from the point of view of multinationals, multilaterals, pools of government funding for a variety of reasons. I would speak to the GPs, family offices, pension funds, insurance companies to say this is where you step up. This is where you are able to grab an opportunity. You're able to create a significant global difference. The Asia Pacific zone is going to be leading the charge. New pools of capital from that side: Korea, Japan, Australia. We're seeing the global south step up in terms of opportunities. India is sort of the voice of the global south. So use India a lot more to test your global south strategies. Use India a lot more to be able to look at food security, sustainable agriculture, climate, pieces that are going to get sort of diffused elsewhere. And leverage therefore your commitments by investing in India to learn more of a global south access. So I would say this is a great year to grab the opportunity for those who are really interested in the long game.
Agree, Royston. I think the shift in certain leadership and paradigms will mean that private capital will be more important than ever. On this note, Sarah says there were a series of questions that mention CSR. I would just like to ask you to reflect for a moment on, why can't CSR play that role creating the pool of funds for social and climate funds in India? What's your view on complexities associated with that?
So that's actually a very interesting question, because the potential pool of capital here in India that's available for CSR and that needs to be deployed every year for CSR is enormous. The challenge is that the way that the CSR norms have been structured, corporates have various obligations. And first and foremost, that obligation is to actually make sure the CSR activity gets undertaken within a period of 1 year. If they don't, then they have to go and claw back the funds and put it into a bank account and then spend that within 3 years for an ongoing project. Now, the challenge that is then associated with that is most of these projects that we're talking about, they are going to last for a period of more than 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. They were talking of maybe 4 years to 5 years at the very least. We had one client that was actually interested in constructing and supporting a hospital. And we had to sit down and work out a very bespoke kind of program for him, where he was actually, it was a 10-year commitment, but he had to meet, we had structured it so it became a series of 10 1-year commitments rather than a single 10-year commitment or obligation over there. So CSR could help, but you have to be innovative. And you have to accept there are always going to be limitations about CSR. The primary thing is going to be that as a corporate, I would always want to be abundantly cautious, because if I don't have the expenditure qualify as CSR, it goes out of my balance sheet and I have to spend it again in any case.
Thank you for that reflection. And I would just state that this is something to pursue in future discussions. In 18 years of investment, I don't think a single one of our portfolio companies has actually been able to benefit from a particular CSR flow. And it's simply because of how fragmented and difficult and how idiosyncratic it is in terms of who you happen to know. And it shouldn't be that way. It has to be a funnel that is, I think, more accessible to the ecosystem writ large, just as a private reflection there. Quick question for Dr. Shah. Someone had asked, how can Indian regulatory boards make policies to encourage the European investment in the European impact investors to invest directly into these impactful Indian SMEs? Do you have a perspective on that to share?
Well, as I said, the new regulations at the GIFT City actually aims towards the global investors. It's not created for the domestic investors to invest into domestic market. These are created for the international investors to invest into India, and thereby to our understanding, it addresses probably the challenges that a global investor, when he's investing into India, looks at the regulation, looks at tax, looks at so many other factors, and finds himself difficult to navigate. And probably that's where this new regulations of the GIFT City could be an use to the people on this call. I would also probably highlight here, we did a project on the reverse flipping of the Indian startup. And to our surprise, the data that we generated in that report was almost 100,000 startups which are already registered in India, and several of the unicorns which have been created and gone and registered outside. And thanks to entrepreneurs like Rajat being in India and creating value for India, there has been so many of the entrepreneurs been taken to the locations outside, and from there they are creating companies and the products for Indian market, which at some point of time becomes very difficult for them to create value in those companies, particularly when they are going for listing. And that's what we observed, that having these norms of allowing the companies to directly list, and we just brought in a direct listing regulation for the startups and this impact companies to come and directly list in dollar for the dollar investors. You are not converting your dollar into Indian rupees, and thereby there's no conversion cost on the dollar into the local currency, and when it is given back to the investors when they sell off their investment. So I think this type of structures may be useful. We are also contemplating listing of the funds. Say, for example, you're investing into an impact fund, that impact fund itself get listed on the stock exchange. And the investors can keep coming in and exiting on that platform. In fact, the government of India made it a completely tax-free transaction for the funds which are listed on the international exchange in GIFT. The investors can buy and sell without any tax implications. I think there are quite a few such structures have been made available, and if we keep engaging with the people on this call, and probably with some of you separately, I'm sure we can all figure out the right platforms for the investors.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. I'm conscious that we must wrap up. I have a dozen more questions I could ask, and thank you to the audience for the rich kind of input. I've only been able to skim the surface of it, so I've tried my best to cover some of it. I'd like to ask each of the panelists, because this is ultimately, why are we doing this? This is all about like the next generation, right? We're trying to do good things that will lay a foundation for sustainability and true adherence to mission in the longer run. What advice would you give to the young ones trying to establish themselves in this market in India? What advice also would you give to those innovators who are maybe moving from nonprofit to for-profit models? There's so many that are trying to figure out how to dip a toe in all of this. And then please, a small reflection in closing from each of you would be appreciated. Perhaps Rajat can start.
I would say probably, I think so. Impact and the motivation for impact is critical, but anyone coming into the space, let's say transitioning from non-profit to for-profit or starting up anew, you need to bring at least one core skill set which probably has nothing to do with impact. So just think of it as what is the core competence you're bringing in, and if you layer in your motivation for creating impact along with that core skill set, hopefully you have something which can build something of value. At least that's how we look at it, because very often the motivation for impact can overpower what you're doing, which results in a bit of a garbled message. So that will be a small kind of input from my side. But overall, I think we covered a broad range of topics as part of this. Lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. And we spend our every day, every week just trying to grapple with those and hopefully come out on the right side.
Thank you very much. Dr. Shah.
I would suggest, I think, always create a credible, projects, because that's what helps you in the long term, and always be within the four corners of the regulations, whatever you do. That could be my take to the investors, to the institutions creating impact.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Andreas.
Yeah. So I would say that my advice would be to think of it as a normal investment and be as disciplined as normal investments are treated. Typically, failures occur because of poor governance, it's because of the team. It's not so much about the opportunity or the actual investments, but there's a lack of discipline, and that is important. Secondly, be patient. You need to have a lot of stamina to do anything entrepreneurial, and in particular in this impact investing space. And finally, when you communicate it, try to align your narrative, the terminology, with that of investors. Too much creativity here doesn't help you, but just alienates you slightly from what the investors are used to hearing. So we need to get all the big European pension funds and everybody else invested into this. That's my strong belief.
Thank you, Andreas. Couldn't agree more. Cerses, closing remarks.
I would say pick your story. Pick what you want to do. Don't try and save everyone and everything at the same time. So pick what is going to be your focus and work on that. That's really the advice that I would give. I would echo also what Andrea said, and be patient. This kind of work requires patience. Change does not happen overnight. But if you have a singular focus, if you have patience, if you are willing to then walk the walk, the chances are, or you will have a greater chance of success, I would find.
Thank you very much, Cerses. Thank you to this panel. Thank you to Royston for all the remarks and inputs. I think we could have gone on for 30 minutes more. I'm already 1 minute past. I just want to say how fortunate I think we all are that we get to be members of and participate in this Impact Council that is run by this amazing team that holds so much knowledge, social capital, and warmth. I mean, we couldn't ask for a more approachable kind of network convener team. And so I think this is a great advantage that we have in the Indian impact landscape specifically. We'd like to be able to reduce the distance between points, make it easier for everybody to reach each other and to learn. And I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to participate in this session today, to ask some of the questions, and to be part of this, this incredible community. So I sign off with that. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Over to Neha for any closing remarks.
I will start. Thank you, Audrey. It was amazing. And for this wonderful moderation, and to all our speakers for this super insightful session. We truly enjoyed it. There was so much content that we can take with us. And I'm speaking for everyone else. I'm taking the right to speak for everyone else in the room. So thank you very much for that. I want to apologize for some people that weren't able to join. We had a hiccup with the capacity. But again, we're recording this session, so please share it and we'll share it with everyone so you can watch the recap. I also, from my end, want to thank the IIC team, Girish, Neha, Varun, who've done all the work on behind the scene and sharing the questions. Thank you so much for that. Super grateful. And I think it was a wonderful kickoff of these series, and really looking forward to do much more of these. And I think we have enough content. And if you have topics and anything that you think we should speak about with IIC that we should bring to the table, then reach out to us, and we'll make sure that we'll bring together the topics in the next session. So thank you for that. That's it from me. Stay tuned, and wish you all a great day ahead. Over to you, Neha.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. This is Neha from Team IIC, and after this spectacular session that leaves us asking for more, I am here to express gratitude. Gratitude towards each one of you for joining our mission of being so close to the word impact. A big shout out to the Impact for Breakfast team, Debbie and Audrey from the Rianta Capital. It's for the partners, for being our partners today. It's always an absolute pleasure to bring the impact world closer with you. Thank you, Royston, for leading the day, setting the stage with your opening remarks. It only tells us how a passionate leader can carve the way for the entire industry. Our strapping panelists for a fantastic discussion, Rajat, Zazek, Andreas, and Dr. Shah. Given the interactive chat with the audience, I'm certain we all have a lot to take back to our whiteboards today. So thank you very much. This session would not have been complete without your support, dear members of the audience that have joined us from various geographies, especially Europe and India. What fantastic questions. We have an entire bucket full of them. We truly appreciate your time invested today, and we'll make sure that we get back with as many answers as possible. Big thanks to the IIC board for the smashing guidance and our dear IIC members for helping us create a stronger narrative for India impact investing industry always. Finally, IIC team, Girish Aiwali, the CEO of IIC, for always having our backs like a true leader. Ranjana, Divya, Mansi, Vidhi, Vishal, Isha, Prashant. It's always teamwork, you all know that. A big special shout out to Varun Reddy from IIC team for his massive effort gone into bringing this session together. I would like to take a quick moment finally before wrapping up. We invite you to join us on the 31st of Jan for yet another thought-provoking session on impact integrity, the role of independent review and verification, hosted by ISE and Bloomberg. The registration link is in your chat box. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Take care.